Gabrielle Weiniger, and welcome to the Debka Files, bringing you exclusive news and insight from the Middle East and around the world. Coming up on this week's show, Iraq's Kurds overwhelmingly back independence in their referendum, despite international pressure to call off the vote. But Debka sources saying the numbers just don't add up. Libyan peace negotiations kick off in Tunis, but Russia appears to be backing both horses in this race, inviting representatives from both governments in Tripoli and Benghazi to Moscow. And the Palestinian Unity Government is meeting in the Gaza Strip, but this new government will be headed by Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah. Hamas's armed wing remains the dominant power in the coastal enclave of 2 million people. In our top headline this week, Iraqi Kurds have overwhelmingly backed independence in their referendum, defying the Iraqi central government and world powers, who fear the vote could fuel Kurdish separatism and lead to fresh violence. But while figures released by the election committee show more than 92% of voters opted for independence, sources at Debka report that the real figure is closer to 60%. President Masoud Barzani's KRG government in Erbil faced a stream of military threats, trying to scare him off holding the referendum, with Turkish and Iranian armies depicted moving towards the Iraqi-Kurdish border. But that turned out to be a far cry from military intervention. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, who issued warnings on a daily basis, finally gave the KRG a 3-day ultimatum to hand over all oil revenues, airports and border crossings to Baghdad. For now, the Kurdish administration is showing little worry on the possible closure of its oil pipelines, where it depends on 85% of its oil exports, as more sanctions are expected following the region's independence from Iraq. Now, a dominant new voice in Middle East politics, Moscow has sent special diplomats to Tehran, Ankara and Baghdad to try and persuade relevant actors to hold back from interfering in the results of the referendum, promising to stand by those countries in forthcoming negotiations. Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Ankara, as Turkish President Erdogan is set to visit Tehran and Baghdad this week, the same day Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz begins a 3-day trip to Moscow. Let's hear those comments from Putin and Erdogan during their meeting in Ankara before we break down the referendum results with this week's guest.
Безусловно, обсудили ситуацию в связи с состоявшимся в иракском Курдистане референдуме о независимости. Принципиальная позиция России известна, она изложена в заявлении Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации.
Gerek Irak'ın gerekse Suriye'nin toprak bütünlüğü konusunda hemfikiriz. Son dönemde maalesef bölgemiz çok daha kırılgan hale geliyor. Referandumun Irak Anayasası ve uluslararası hukuk bakımından hiçbir meşruiyeti yoktur. Maalesef bölgesel yönetim tüm dostça ikazlara rağmen referandumu düzenlemekle çok büyük bir yanlış yapmıştır. Referandum sonrası hassas dönemde özellikle Irak bölgesel yönetiminin daha vahim hatalar yapmasının önüne geçmemiz gerekiyor. Uluslararası toplumun Irak'ın toprak bütünlüğü ve siyasi birliğinden yana tavır alması büyük önem arz ediyor.
To discuss, we're joined by Dr. Mordechai Kedar, scholar of Arabic culture and a lecturer at Bar-Ilan University. Dr. Kedar, thanks so much for being with us.
A pleasure.
Let's start with Debka's sources, claiming the vote for independence wasn't as overwhelmingly backed as the figures say. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't believe. I think that the vast majority of the Kurds do support the independence de jure, not only de facto, because de facto they are already independent for many years. Since 1991, they started the path to independence. They have their own economy, they have their own government, they have their own parties and mass media, and of course army, the Peshmerga, and police, and whatever a state needs, they have. Now they want also the international seal of approval on their independence, and this is where all kinds of countries object, like Turkey, Iran, Iraq, of course, and the Syrians as well, while the West, like the Americans and Europeans, do not support the Kurds, unfortunately, because a Kurdish state is only justice to these people who were ignored through the 20th century since the end of the First World War, which forgot about them, and they were divided between the Syrians, between the Turks, between the Iraqis, and the Iranians. Why shouldn't they have a state for themselves? They are like 30 million people. However, I must admit, the Kurds, unfortunately, are fragmented within themselves. And if they were more united, they would have had a state long ago. But unfortunately, this is the culture of the Middle East. Tribalism is more powerful than anything else. And they actually take advantage of the fact that there is no Iraqi nation, because Iraq is highly fragmented to ethnic groups like Kurds and Arabs and Turkmens and Persians and others, tribes, and of course the religions. There are Muslims and Christians and Sabbais and Mandays and Yazidis and others, and of course the sects in Iraq, the Sunnah and the Shia and all kinds of denominations of other religions. And there is no Iraqi nation. It's only in the theory. There are citizens of Iraq, but no nation, consolidated and galvanized. And they actually take advantage of the fact that they were hated through the 20th century. Don't forget the vicious wars which the Iraqi government, the Arab government, waged against the Kurds through the 20th century. And the rebellion of the Kurds, of course, who wants to be killed by his own government? So I would say that the Iraqi state earned this hatred of the Kurds to the state through long years of enmity and actually all-out war at some times between the government and the Kurds.
Dr. Kedar, in the face of this rejection, in the face of the rejection we're seeing from Baghdad, from other countries like America, what can we expect to see in the aftermath of the vote? And we've seen already threats of sanctions, of very tough economic sanctions, even military intervention against the KRG. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the Kurds proved that they are, when they are determined to get something, they get it. They know what to do. They are very brave people, and they deserve to have a state, and they know.
But are we going to see this kind of harsh reaction from the governments that oppose this independence?
Look, I don't believe that even if Turkey and Iran and Syria and Iraq unite their efforts in order to topple the Kurds, in order to bring them to their knees so they give up on the statehood, I don't believe that this coalition will stand forever because of the differences between all these countries, especially the Shi'i Iran and the Sunni Turkey, and Iraq, which doesn't see all the time the same thing as the Syrians. I don't believe that this coalition will survive forever.
Because, like you said, Kurds are one of the largest ethnic groups in the region, and they're spread among Iraq,
in the whole world.
Syria, Iran, Turkey. Are we going to see similar claims for autonomy from these areas as those countries fear at the moment?
Well, there are already, and it's not in news, because the Kurds in Turkey demand the independence, or at least a large autonomy, for many years. The Kurds in Syria, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, so-called, which started or erupted in Syria in March 2011. And don't forget that even in Iran, many minorities demand autonomy, if not independence. The Arabs in Ahwaz, the Baloch in the southeast, the Kurds in the north.
So are we going to see Kurds now suffer? We've got Ankara here threatening to impose sanctions against the semi-autonomous Kurdish region. I have actually a quote here from President Erdogan saying it will be left in the lurch and its people will go hungry. Well,
don't forget that Turkey has its own problem with the Kurds. And in every city in Turkey, there is a big neighborhood of Kurds. If the Kurds are being angry at the Turks because of what they do to their brethren in Iraq, the Kurds can devastate Turkey in no time. I don't think that they will do it so easily, because the Turkish army and the police are vicious when they need to. But the
are we
Kurds
going to see
also,
then the Kurds unite across Turkey, Iran?
This scenario can be, but it's not likely to be in the near future, because Kurds are fragmented also, and this is why they don't have a state until this very day. But if they are pushed to the corner, they might be very dangerous, especially to Turkey, where they live in every city. And if they really want, they can devastate the state in spite of what Erdogan wants.
And tell me, people are saying there's going to be tough economic sanctions to make the Kurds back down. That may include the closure of certain pipelines. I want to bring it to the economic idea. Could this disrupt the region's economy? And what about Israel, who relies so much on all of this oil?
Well, Israel knows how to find substitutes when it needs. We did it for many years. However, don't forget that Turkey actually makes a big money on the Kurdish oil. And Turkey will have damages if they close this outlet of oil through Turkey to the Mediterranean for the Kurds.
So how are they really going to respond despite all of this rhetoric? They might actually not do anything in that case.
I have no idea, because Erdogan doesn't tell me what his plans are. But don't forget that in a war, everybody is losing. Nobody wins.
What about the Israeli position on Kurdish independence? They seem to have backed independence in principle, but not by fact.
Well, Israel takes a moral position here, because if we Jews deserve a state, why shouldn't the Kurds have their own state? So since the Kurds, more or less in the same position as we were like 90 years ago, when in the Balfour Declaration, for example, we got it and they did not. It's time that they have it, because it's only historic justice.
And what about Western opposition here, the US and the EU? They said the timing of the vote could weaken Iraq's unity at the time that fight against terror is paramount. Will this affect the fight against ISIS, or in fact weaken the government, the central government that is in Baghdad?
Well, the West turns to be very cynical. On one side, the West builds on the Kurds the fight against ISIS. When it comes to pay the Kurds for their effort and the blood which they actually sacrificed in order to free the world from Daesh, from the ISIS, now everybody becomes, oh no, don't do it now because it's not the time. When is the time? And don't forget that the State Department, for example, in the United States was against the Declaration of Independence here in Israel as well. And only the President Truman, without his advisors, decided to recognize the State of Israel. So sometimes politicians become very cynical, and they take care of their own interests rather than the interests of the people who deserve to have some kind of benefits from the situation in the world.
So would you say then Kurdish independence and a mandate for that independence is a sure thing?
Look, it all depends on the Kurds. If they are determined, if they are willing to fight, yes, fight against all those who try to topple them, they will have a state.
And my final question, we have time for one last question here. Let's look at Russian involvement. President Putin taking the lead to make a unified policy in line with Iraq, Turkey and Iran, of course, all which have Kurdish populations. They're looking to deal with the consequences of the independence vote. What are Russia's interests here, and how will they show their backing to their allies against Kurdistan?
Well, if you look at the Russian behavior in Syria through the last 2 years, how they bombed cities, how they flattened towns, how they killed with no restriction, the last thing which I expect from the Russians is to take a moral position vis-a-vis anything in the world. They do what is good for Russia and let the others go to hell, including the Kurds.
All right, Dr. Kedar, that referendum certainly has increased tensions across a region already struggling to deal with so many problems. We'll leave it there for now, but thank you for joining us here on the Debka Files. Staying with Russian regional influence, and President Putin appears to be backing both sides of the Libyan crisis. Both the UN-backed government of National Accord, based in Tripoli, and the Libyan National Army, led by former Gaddafi General Khalifa Haftar, heading the eastern government in Benghazi, sent emissaries to Moscow in September, along with the new UN Special Envoy for Libya, Ghassan Salameh. He met with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov over formal future cooperation. But Putin seems to be betting on the Benghazi government, which controls the oil-rich eastern sector, coming out on top and emerging as the national leader of all Libya. The Libyan general has made 3 trips to Moscow in the past year and won the promise of Russian diplomatic and military support, even flying the army's wounded to Moscow for medical treatment. Meanwhile, the United Nations has gathered Libyan lawmakers from rival parliaments in Tunis in a push for a new peace deal in Libya. The lawmakers are due to debate changes to a stalled 2015 deal that the UN hopes can lead to national elections next year. Take a listen to the progress on those talks so far.
But it is my deep belief that there is an opportunity for a political solution in Libya. And I do believe that we all need to come together, independent and sometimes different opinions, different perspectives, different interests. We all need to come together to make sure that this opportunity translates itself into a reality.
A watershed in Russian-US interaction in Syria after the death of a Russian general, Valery Asapov, in an unusually precise ISIS mortar attack on their eastern Syrian command post at Deir ez-Zor. This was a secret command post overseeing the crossing by Syrian and Hezbollah forces to the eastern banks of the Euphrates over Russian-built bridges under their air cover. President Putin vowed a high-stake military retribution against whichever party which tipped off the ISIS mortar crew with pinpoint intelligence for the attack. Their first suspect, the United States, but a Russian probe speaking of a betrayal by an unidentified party. Debka's military and intelligence sources reporting the danger of a Russian-US clash in Syria has abated, but it is still acute. Russians are pumping reinforcements of special forces into eastern Syria, standing by for orders either to strike US special operations or the US-backed SDF. Moving now to the Gaza Strip, and officials from the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority have crossed into the coastal enclave via the Israeli-controlled Erez crossing, paving the way for Hamas to hand over control of the territory to the Ramallah-based government. Rami Hamdallah and a high-level delegation of officials and security officers are due to attend the first joint cabinet meeting of Hamas and PA officials in 10 years, after the Islamist group seized the territory back in 2007. The besieged coastal enclave has struggled with months of electricity shortages and high unemployment. Debka's sources note that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have agreed to stand aside and allow officials to cross after meeting with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who is choreographing the effort to restore PA rule to the Gaza Strip, as backed by Russia and Saudi Arabia. Hamas, meanwhile, has demanded a 6-month timeline for Palestinian presidential elections to take place by March 2018, and has also freed 5 prisoners belonging to Fatah ahead of the planned handover of administrative control. And Osama bin Laden's favorite son, Hamza bin Laden, now in his 20s, is being tagged as the new leader of Al-Qaeda. A new book by the former FBI counterterrorism agent who identified the 9/11 hijackers, Ali Soufan, highlights Hamza's qualifications for the role. Hamza has even been recognized by the US State Department, which placed Hamza bin Laden on its list of specially designated global terrorists earlier this year. He first attracted attention in a video message back in 2015, introduced by Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri as, quote, a lion from the den of Al-Qaeda, where Hamza hailed the martyrdom of his father and praised the group's leaders in Syria, Yemen and North Africa, calling to take the battlefield from Kabul, Baghdad and Gaza to Washington, London, Paris and Tel Aviv. 6 years after the death of bin Laden, who ordered the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers, Hamza called to save Syria from the Assad regime. Now, with ISIS losing its strongholds in Syria and Iraq, Al-Qaeda and its affiliates are resurging, with its Syrian affiliate, the Nusra Front, now renamed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, numbering more than 20,000 fighters. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula occupies strategic stretches of Yemen's coastline, while Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has absorbed several other factions in Africa and is currently on the offensive. Writer Ali Soufan describes Hamza as prepared for the leadership role his father founded, gaining popularity in both rank and file. Well, with ISIS seemingly on the verge of collapse in its strongholds in Syria and Iraq, we'll keep an eye on Hamza bin Laden's rise to the top, as sources say he's well placed to reunify the global Islamist movement. For now, though, we'll bring you the news in brief. North Korea's black market for arms booms in an unexpected direction as Egyptian customs agents, secretly alerted by Washington last August, boarded a mysterious vessel named Ji-shun, flying a Cambodian flag, heading for the Suez Canal from North Korea. This only to discover a hidden cargo of more than 30,000 rocket-propelled grenades, what the UN is calling the largest seizure of weapons in the history of sanctions against Pyongyang. But the big surprise? Its recipient, none other than Egypt itself. The Las Vegas police report the primary suspect, a local of Las Vegas, is dead, and they are looking for his roommate as a person of interest in the shooting attack Monday on a country concert taking place outside the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. The gunman, using an automatic rifle to spray the audience of thousands, fired from the 32nd floor of the hotel. The head of the Catalan regional government has opened the door to a potential declaration of independence of Catalonia from Spain after a day of tensions in the northeastern region, where police were deployed to thwart an independence vote. But the Spanish government doesn't consider it a legitimate declaration, considering it rather a crime, while the people saying this is a victory. The ISIS mortar shelling near Deir el-Zor in Syria, which killed Russian General Valery Asapov last week, also injured 2 Russian colonels. One of them, Colonel Valery Fedyanin, commander of the 61st Marine Brigade, has since died of his wounds in hospital. Official figures released from the Russian Defense Ministry said in August that 34 Russian servicemen had been killed in Syria since the start of the military campaign there 2 years ago, almost to the day. A ban on full-face coverings in public went into effect in Austria this week as several hundred people gathered in Vienna to protest against the measure. Wearing burqas and niqabs is now illegal in public, along with other face coverings such as clown masks and ski masks. People appearing in public with their faces covered are now subject to a €150 fine and will also not be allowed to enter the country at border controls. And the biggest car firms are over the moon over the new Saudi car decree. Huge ads have blossomed on Saudi social media, with choice vehicles rolling in to tempt an estimated 8 million Saudi women whom King Salomon's royal decree will finally allow to drive cars from next summer. That wraps up this week's show. Just a sample of the Debka weekly newsletter you can get straight to your inbox every week. For the full range of exclusive news and insights, you can sign on at debka.com/weekly. From me and the team here, thanks for joining us here at Debka Files, broadcast from the ILTV studios in Tel Aviv. We'll see you again next week. Bye for now.